Good morning, and on behalf of OK Ethics and Southern Nazarene University, we're very proud that you're proud to host together this event, and really excited for our speakers. So what I need you to do as I begin to introduce our speakers, I want you just for a moment, I promise it'll be very quick, close your eyes and think of a significant female in your life, and I'm going to say something and you help me finish the phrase. If you can't say something nice, yeah, you heard it too. But sometimes the truth is we have to say something, and we have to do something, and sometimes when we're struggling with a situation or an individual, we have to continue to work together. And so we're really excited to have Sarita Maybin with us today. Let me point your attention to page number 5 in your program, which has more of her biographical information. But I'll read just a portion of that to finish, but let me tell you the reason that Shannon and SNU are so excited to have her here today. We're all, as Jim Priest said, we're voting with our feet today. We've made a decision that this hour and a half we're going to spend here, we really want to put practical application on the situations that we encounter every day. There's so many of you that I know around this room, and I'm very proud to know you, and you're doing really good work. And so that's the point of these times. We want to be getting better today as a community and leading forward. So Sarita Maybin, since 1993, has spoken at conferences, companies, and campuses in all the 50 states. Can you imagine that? And in 2012, she was named one of the top 5 communication speakers and had a privilege of speaking on the TEDx stage. Sarita is a former university dean of students with a master's degree in counseling, a Toastmasters humorous speech contest winner, and a past president of the National Speakers Association San Diego chapter, where she still lives. She's been interviewed about her recent book, which is what she'll be talking about. If you can't say something nice, what do you say? Got the opportunity to see Sarita last night, and I really know that you're in for an engaging, purposeful time. Please join me in welcoming Sarita Maybin.
Thank you, Brent. I appreciate that introduction. And as Brent already said, we've all heard it before, and I'm going to ask you to repeat it again. If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. And one of the things I've discovered is that universal wisdom prevails everywhere. As you heard in the introduction, I've spoken in different places, in fact, in all 50 states, 9 other countries, and even in the Arctic Circle in Iceland, they can complete that phrase. If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. So it is indeed the universal wisdom that we all heard from someone, whether it be our mothers, our grandmothers, aunts, uncles. Someone told us, don't say anything. But then what happens? You grow up and you go into the workplace. And I bet every day of the week, no matter who you work for, you probably have an occasion to say something not so nice. And so the question is, how do you then communicate in a positive way when you have to share concerns, give some negative feedback, tell someone that what they're doing is getting on your last nerve? How do you do that in a productive way? I grew up as a military brat, and I was so glad that there was an acknowledgement of the military. Some of us, in fact, went to dinner, as Brent alluded to. Some of us had an opportunity to have dinner, and thank you, Dr. Newman, for hosting us at the university once again. We were talking a bit about military, and it seemed that we all seemed to have some connection with the military. And, when I grew up as a military brat, my dad was in the Army 26 years. So we moved every 2 to 3 years, just like clockwork. And I remember sometimes we would be sad because we would be leaving friends and we'd be like, bye, sad. Other people, we'd be like, bye-bye. We were all too happy to be rid of them. And then wouldn't you know, we would get to the new place and there they would be. Now, sometimes, truthfully, it was not really them, but someone who seemed suspiciously like them. You ever notice that the same things that get on your nerve, the same types of behaviors that get on your nerves and cause you angst here, you go over there, same kind of things, push your buttons. And sometimes we say, well, I don't like this company, I'm going to go somewhere else. And then we have the same kind of issues. I don't like this neighborhood, I'm going to move to another neighborhood. Same kind of issues. And it reminds me of a quote that an ancient philosopher once said, which is, wherever you go, there you are. I was like, ooh, that's harsh. But when you think about it, we are the common denominator very often in the same types of conflicts that we find ourselves in over and over, the same types of issues over and over, and we are that common denominator. So today in our brief time together, I'm going to give you a chance to do a couple things. One, to think about some ways to approach situations and maybe tweak things just a little bit. But also I'm going to give you a little chance to chat with some of the folks at your table as we go along. I like to gather the collective wisdom because I think there's lots of ideas to be shared on how we can constructively handle situations. So I mentioned I grew up as a military brat. I also grew up as the oldest of 4 children. Any of my fellow eldest children in the house? Okay, I'm among a few kindred spirits. Yay. Well, the plight of my existence as a child was my 2 younger sisters and my younger brother, who spent our entire childhood saying, "You're not the boss of me." So my fellow eldest who've identified themselves, you'll relate to this. You're not the boss of me. And what struck me as rather interesting is I grew up, I went to college, got my little degrees, went to job, worked in the university arena with my previous career, and I was the boss of some people. But yet there were days when people would look at me, and maybe they didn't say it out loud, but when someone's giving you the subliminal, "You're not the boss of me." And so my challenge as the oldest of 4 children, the bossy big sister, was how do I boss people around without them knowing I'm being bossy? And that was the challenge. And of course, many days we are asking for support from other people, and we really are not the boss of them. And how do we get them to go along and feel like they want to collaborate and cooperate without us appearing bossy? I feel like that has been my challenge my entire adult life as a manager, as a colleague, as a business person, is how do I communicate without invoking the "you're not the boss of me" reaction? Isn't that the ultimate challenge? Because a lot of days we're asking for help and we're not the boss of anyone. In fact, I discovered early on that there were some slight changes I could make in my wording that would keep that "you're not the boss of me" reaction at bay. And you'll notice on the screen there's some things that I would likely say that you see I'm now forbidden with a slash through them. My bossy big sister side would say, "You know what you should do? You better. You know what you need to do." And I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I know some of you have probably heard yourselves say those same types of phrases. And typically when we use that kind of wording, it invokes the person's "whatever" reaction. It's the defensive "no, I'm not." The shield goes up. And so we're going to look at some alternate phrasing that we might use that might be more inclusive, might be more collaborative, and not so bossy. So, sound good? So I have a favorite mantra, I suppose we can call it mantra. It's a regular phrase, a popular phrase, but I've chosen to change it just ever so slightly. And I think that the goal is to say what you mean what you say, and don't say it mean. I think that's the neat trick. If you can pull that off, I think that's the real goal. To say what we mean what we say, and not say it mean. In other words, people sometimes say, "Well, Sarita, you travel around the world talking to people about staying positive, collaborating, communicating," or as my husband likes to say, helping people play nicely at work. And are you trying to tell them to be sugar-coated and Pollyanna? That's not a good thing. But really, we're not trying to do that because I think there's a lot of territory in the middle between the extreme of not saying anything at all, which we've been told, and then saying something in a positive way. So today we're going to talk about that middle ground where we can say what we mean what we say, and don't say it mean. By the way, you'll notice on the bottom of each slide I have my Twitter handle, @Sarita Maybin, and I encourage you, if you're so inclined, to tweet. You're welcome to take pictures of the slides. You're welcome to share those on social media. But I do think this slide is my most frequently tweeted phrase that personally, I choose to share on social media. In fact, one of my others, how many of you are familiar with John Maxwell, the leadership guru? John Maxwell. I'm a fan of his, and I've had an opportunity to see him speak in person on several occasions. And one of my favorites that he shares is that really people don't care how much you know. until they know how much you care. And we all have a lot of knowledge, don't we? We know whatever our expertise is. We have a lot of information. Some of you have lots of policies, lots of procedures, lots of rules and regulations. But you know that your colleagues and your customers could care less unless they know that you care. And so I love this quote because I think it's a great backdrop for everything that we're going to talk about. So now I'm going to give you a rare opportunity. How often do you get given permission to whine? So please see this for what it is. This is a venting opportunity. I'm going to ask you to choose someone to your left or to your right. My 26-year-old daughter would call this your BFF, best friend forever. And someone in one of my presentations recently said, Sarita, this person next to me is not my best friend forever. Maybe my BFFN. I'm like, what is a BFFN? That's just a made-up acronym. And they said, my best friend for now. So I would like you to answer this, I won't say answer the question, but to ponder situations where you're currently, right now, thinking to confront or not to confront. Because, I think every day there's a dilemma where we have to decide, do I say something or do I not? The hand-wringing conversation? Should I say something? Maybe somebody else will say something. Maybe it's not my place to say something. Maybe it'll resolve itself. Maybe we just hem and haw, ruminate, and really just procrastinate addressing the situation. So with your best friend for now, by the way, choose wisely. I'm going to give you several opportunities to chat with this person during our brief time together. So choose your best friend for now wisely. And I'd like you to use this venting opportunity to just share, we'll call it sharing, about something that you need to confront. And it may not even be at work. If you have nothing at work, go home. You know what they say about home, don't you? Home is where we go when we're tired of being nice. So work or home, a brief sharing, what is it that you know needs to be confronted even as we speak? Alrighty then, let's come back together. So it sometimes feels like this elephant, this burden that you're carrying around, trying to decide if you want to confront or not. And I feel like there's a household task that reminds me of conflict. My least favorite household task, which is dishwashing. You notice how sometimes it's like the dishes are in the sink, and this is how it is for me. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't feel like taking the dishes out of the dishwasher to put the clean ones in there, so I'll do it tomorrow. And I come back tomorrow and I'm like, dishes are still in the sink. Like somehow they would have magically put themselves in the dishwasher and magically become washed, but they're still there. And then I come back the third day and I'll be darned if those dishes are not still there, like they haven't been magically washed by the dishwashing elves. And guess what? Now they're grungier. And I always feel like that's like conflict. Like somehow we think it's going to magically resolve itself. I'm sure it'll work itself out. But really what happens is that conflict just becomes grungier. And at some point, we have to deal with it. And the question is, how do we know when to confront and when to just let it go? Isn't that the million-dollar question? And I have a kind of a litmus test, I like to call it, a 3-question litmus test. When those dishes are in the sink, the proverbial dishes that are getting grungier, that conflict, that situation that needs to be addressed, I think the 3 questions that we can ask ourselves is it having a negative effect? Because sometimes it's not even about the effect it's having. Sometimes we say, I like to say, we have ego issues. I have ego issues. My ego issue sounds like, I must show them the error of their ways. Well, they're not doing it Sarita's way. I must show them how it should be done. It would just be so much easier if they just do it the way I told them to do it. I always feel like those are kind of ego issues. But instead, to ask the 3 questions, is it having some sort of a negative effect? When you do this, here's the effect on getting our work done. When you do this, here's the effect on the morale. When you do this, here's what happens as a result. The second question, of course, is that situation starting to affect our attitude? Now, I know that there are some people, you can name names, I'm sure. The minute they walk into your office, you're like looking for that lever. Where's the lever? I can just pull it. And they'll fall in. Okay, maybe that's a little ugly. But we all have the evil twin. I think we all have the evil twin who is the ugly and unethical one who would have us do crazy stuff. But when we find ourselves being tainted and becoming negative as a result, we're feeling resentment, then that might be a clue to confront. By the way, some of you may have heard of the definition of resentment. The definition of resentment, taking poison and waiting for the other person to die. So I'm over here going, Russell, you won't believe it. What they did it again today. I'm taking the proverbial poison, but in reality, the other person has no idea that there's a problem. But I'm hemming and hawing and ranting. Kind of reminds me of a woman who came up to me one time, and I invite you to come to me afterwards with your questions one-on-one. And normally I try to gather myself and censor myself and gain my composure and say something really profound and civilized. But I remember this one time this woman came to me and she says, Sarita, I think my coworker is laying awake at night plotting my demise. Before I could even censor myself, I said, no, she's not. You're laying awake at night. She is sleeping soundly. Because you ever notice that people who are part of the problem have no idea that they're part of the problem, but yet our resentment is building. Our attitude is getting a little ugly. We're getting a little upset. We're carrying around the proverbial elephant, the weight on our shoulders. And I think when that happens, as we see in the second question here, is it affecting my attitude? That might be a clue to confront. And then last but not least, what are the consequences of not confronting? I think you've probably all been in situations where there are some things going on. And the consequence is it affects other people. There was a survey done by a consulting firm in New York City, and they asked people around the country from all different industries, what's your number one complaint about where you work? Isn't that a great question? What's your number one complaint about where you work? And you know what the answer was? I'm going to paraphrase loosely. The answer was, people are getting away with stuff and no one is doing anything about it. And so sometimes the consequence of not confronting negative situations is the good people go away. The good people leave. The good people lose their motivation because some of the, not bad people, but some of the bad behavior may not be addressed. So again, to ask yourself as you were thinking about the situation that you were venting about, to think about, is that situation one where there's a negative effect as a result? Is the situation starting to affect you? And is there some sort of negative consequence if it's not addressed? So that's your litmus test as you think about the situation. But I want to move on to some strategies. I want to move on to a 3-step process for confronting concerns. And I use the acronym AIR because I talked about it for so many years that I realized this is what I was saying: awareness, impact, request. And it became an acronym that I made up, AIR, A-I-R. In fact, I have a whole chapter in my book, if you can't say something nice, about AIR. That first A is what I was just talking about, the woman who was laying awake at night. Really, again, people are not aware of what they're doing. They're just doing what they do. And so we have to make them aware. Give them the benefit of the doubt that perhaps they didn't know there was a problem. I always think sometimes when you're wringing your hands, though, should I confront? Should I say something? Maybe I shouldn't say something. I don't know. So that whole conversation, the I, the impact, is the key. And in fact, in case I didn't mention, all of these slides are in your materials that you have on your page. And if any of you are taking notes, I'd love you to write next to the I, so what? So what? Because sometimes when we're debating and we're hand-wringing, we don't know whether to confront. I always think for me, I snap myself out of that by saying, well, so what? Why do I care to even confront? What is the impact of their behavior? So making them aware, perhaps you didn't realize, the impact, when you come in late, the customers have to wait, might be the impact, hypothetically. But where we fall down sometimes is the R, the request. We may not ask what we want them to do differently. I remember I was at a company speaking to a group of supervisors, and they were talking about this thing of late, employees coming late. That happened to be the conversation of the day, and that they needed to confront this because people are just coming in later and later and later. And so I asked them what their requests would be, the R. Like I said, in your heart of hearts, what would you like to see happen? And one guy says, well, I'd like them to arrive early and bring donuts. In his heart of hearts, that's what he wanted. And the funny thing is it became a joke at that company, and then it became a rule at that company. If you're late to the meeting, you better have a mocha frappuccino, a macchiato, or something from the Starbucks. You better come with everybody's favorite drink because that is your punishment for being late. And I thought it was interesting that joking about what they really wanted ultimately came out in how they actually chose to behave. But my favorite response was the guy who said, I was asking everybody to chat about, what do you want in your heart of hearts? In that situation that you were discussing, how would you like to see that changed? What would you like to see the person do differently in your heart of hearts? And a guy raised his hand, he goes, seriously? What I would like them to do is just to never show up at work ever again. So I'm going to ask you to chat with your new best friend for now and share, short of them never darkening your doorway again, short of that, what would you like to see done differently in the situation, in your heart of hearts? How would you like to see that situation change? So I'll give you a few moments to chat about that. Let's come back together. So don't worry. You will have another chance to continue your conversation as you talk about a real life situation that you're wanting to address. I want to give you another tool in addition to the AIR, A-I-R, awareness, impact, and request. I want to also give you my favorite thing to talk about, which is my top 10 positive communication phrases. And you'll notice that the first set of phrases are about giving them the benefit of the doubt. And then, of course, we do want to seek input. And then sometimes, instead of saying, well, you need to, you better, again, that bossy big sister pointing the finger, instead taking responsibility, I would appreciate, I'm concerned, and then ultimately working together better. I have a few favorites on the list, but I'm going to actually give you a chance to chat about your favorites. Also, I should point out these are in your packet as well. You have the 10 phrases in your packet. But I do, actually, before I give you a chance to chat, I should talk about the photo. I just recently changed the photo. I used to have the photo on here of my favorite hero, Columbo. Any of you remember Columbo? Peter Falk, wrinkled raincoat, detective, Columbo. And I used to have him on the photo because he is my poster child for my favorite phrase, which is phrase number 8. Help me understand. And you remember he used to say, help me understand. I thought we agreed we were going to meet at the courthouse at noon. I thought we agreed that this is what we were going to do. So I'm here to testify that I've spent my entire adult life being Columbo. When someone promises something, it doesn't go according to plan, or they do something other than what we agreed, help me understand. But I've replaced that photo recently with a photo of myself and my new husband. I just got remarried 3 years ago, which I'm super excited about. Was married to, I love it. I'll take a few little applause. I love it. She's like, yay, I'll take the applause. But I point this out because I was married for 3 years. I was married for 12 years, rather, and then divorced for 12 years. And then I got remarried 3 years ago. However, someone pointed out to me at the end of a presentation that I had way more stories about the ex-husband and no stories about the new husband. And what was up with that? Why are you still talking about the old husband? So I've had to kick him to the curb. I don't think there'll be any stories today about the ex-husband. Now, if I had more time, I might allow him one story. But today there will be no stories about the ex-husband. So I've now debuted my husband in the top 10. He's just made his debut in my presentation. And the reason I bring this up is that when you're in a new relationship, it's just like at work. When you have a new employee, a new team member, a new staff person, you have to start all over again, trying to decide what is the best way to work with them. What is the best way to collaborate? What pushes their buttons? What do they like? What do they not like? And so the top 10 phrases come in real handy, not just in a new marriage, but also at work. Remember I said home is where we go when we're tired of being nice? So we have to be mindful that we can use these phrases in both places. And so I'm going to ask you to do two things. I'm going to ask you to talk about which phrases might you be able to use at work with a straight face, and which phrases might you use at home. And if you have a little time left over, how about which phrases might you use in the situation that you've been chatting about already? Might you use some of these to address that situation? So I'll give you just a few moments to chat about the top 10 phrases. All righty then, let's come back together. So you've been chatting with your best friend for now. I've been eavesdropping as well, lots of interesting discussion. And I think all of these phrases can be used for good, but I do know some people use them for evil. And I say that because I do invite you to reach out to me after today and let me know how the phrases go, whether you tried them out, what's happened. I'd love to hear a great success story. And I got such an email, this was a while back, from a gentleman who was in my presentation, and the subject line on the email said, "Distortion of Sarita's top 10." Now, I didn't know who this man was. It was someone from my presentation, but I was intrigued by the subject line. So I thought, let me open this email and see what this is all about. But I scrolled down cautiously, because after all, he had said distortion. He says, "Sarita, I just want to let you know I'm already putting the top 10 phrases to good use at work. Here are some examples of how I'm using them." And he took each of the 10 phrases and used it for evil instead of good. Even my beloved phrase number 8, my favorite, he said he was going up to his coworkers and he was looking at them and he was saying, "Rocky, help me understand why they hired you." And then he dropped down to phrase number 6. He says, "Betty, I notice you're still here, and I'm wondering when you're going to get out of my face." And then he culminated with, "Brent, what will it take to get rid of you?" That was evil. That was evil. And I say that because I think anything can be used for good or for evil, for positive or for negative, because a lot of it is about our intention. Do we intend to collaborate in a positive way? Do we intend to behave in an ethical way? Do we intend to work together better? Or are we looking for a way to divide ourselves, to have conflict, to put a wedge in between the situation? So a lot of what happens with the phrases and what we say is really about our intention and how do we intend to use them. So I invite you to use them for good. I invite you to reach out to me and let me know how it goes. I do have my contact information for those of you who do wish to stay in touch. I actually also do a monthly, what do you say, communique, which is a monthly little email that I send out once a month with my communication tips, stay positive tips. And those of you who are interested in that, when you sign up, you get a PDF with 50 phrases. So there are endless phrases to be had. Because I think at the end of the day, we can have theory, we can have conjecture, we can have policy, but at the end of the day, it comes down to what do I say? When we see each other in the hallway, when we see each other in the meeting, what do we actually say? So I think at the end of the day, we need the words that we can use in a positive way. Of course, I'm on social media, so do feel free to follow me on Twitter and to like my Facebook Sarita Talk page and stay connected afterwards. One of the things that's going to be really amusing when you leave here today, you're going to go back to work. And, usually I'm sure that when you come to the OK Ethics luncheons, you leave and you're like, okay, I got some insights, some inspiration, some tools. I'm ready. So you go back all, ready to go. And, wouldn't it be an interesting trick if you walk in the door at the office and someone comes up to you and they say, I'm concerned. You're like, wait a minute. I would appreciate, wait a minute. They've been to the seminar. Isn't it something when people use this stuff against you? We can talk all day about how do we constructively confront, but the question is, can you take it as well as you dish it out? Can you gracefully receive feedback in addition to being able to give feedback? So I think I'd be remiss if I didn't spend a little time talking about receiving, being on the receiving end of feedback, and how do we do that gracefully? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk a bit about what do you do when someone asks your opinion and you have nothing nice to say. And then we're going to wrap up with 3 Ps for staying positive. Sound good? All right. So the goal, I think, and this is one of my favorites actually, of something I probably talk a lot about, which is to speak in a way that people love listening to you. And that's what we've been talking about so far. This first half of our time together, we've been talking about how do we speak so that it'll be well received, it'll be positive, it'll promote collaboration. But the flip side of that is also true. How do we listen in a way that people love speaking to us? I was sharing at the dinner last night that today was going to be a great day for me because you all are a positive group, you're here to learn. I don't think anyone came dragged kicking and screaming, did they? Was anyone dragged? Did Shannon drag anybody kicking and screaming? No. I say that only because this is a great day for me, and I was glad that... First, let's give Shannon a round of applause before we continue for putting this together. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that. She and I have emailed endlessly for the last so many months, and just in preparation for my coming here from San Diego today. But I have to say, today is a good day for me because sometimes I'll get invited to come to companies, and there'll be like 500 people. I was telling them last night, there'll be like 500 people in the room, and they've all been sent to get fixed. They've been told you're getting a little negative lately. You need to go to the mandatory negativity workshop and get fixed. So I walk into the room, there's 500 people with their arms folded, and they're looking at me like, bring it. What you got? So today is a good day. I don't think anyone is here under duress. I hope no one has been sent to the mandatory luncheon. And I poke fun and I joke about it, but really what I find when I speak at those places where people are sent because they need to fine-tune a few things, what I find when I speak to them privately afterwards or on the breaks is that they're telling me that they have not been heard. They're saying, no one wants to know what I think, no one asked my opinion. So I think half the battle is this second half of this quote, which is, are we listening in a way that people love speaking to us? Or do people come to us knowing that we're going to be resistant? Knowing that we're going to shoot them down, knowing that we're going to say, that's a dumb idea. Are they hesitant because they're not sure of how we're going to react? So are we also listening? Because I see that when I go to these different places, that's a powerful piece that sometimes we miss. So we have to be able to dish it out and take it both in a positive and constructive way. The best advice I ever received for doing that was a mentor I had when I was a graduate student many years ago. She told me the best advice I've probably received in my adult life. Her advice was, when you get criticism, there's only one rule. You see, it says two, but there's really only one rule. Because rule number one is ask for more. And what's rule number two? See, rule number one. And, I thought about that, and I said, okay, ask for more, whatever. I didn't know what that meant. At the time, I was like, okay, it sounds interesting. But fast forward several years later, after grad school, working in the university arena, a supervisor, trying to be the boss of some people, even though some people didn't want me to be the boss of them. And it was interesting because I found that there was a situation that really brought to life this particular piece of advice. I had gone to a presentation, much like this one. It actually was an all-day workshop for supervisors. And they had said at the workshop, it would be a great idea. It'd be a great idea to go back and when you have one-on-one meetings with your staff, it'd be a great idea to ask them for their thoughts, to say, what do you think we can do to improve the department? That sounds like a good question, doesn't it? How many of you are in a supervisory role? Hands up real high. Let's see who the supervisor's in the house. Okay. All right. She's like, maybe. She's not sure she knows. Maybe. New supervisor? She's not sure she wants to acknowledge. I promise I won't single you out. But I went to this workshop for supervisors. It was an all-day workshop for supervisors, and they said you should go back and ask your staff for their input. Ask them this question: what do you think we can do to improve the department? That sounded like a good question. Doesn't it make sense? So I couldn't wait to go home and try out my new tricks. So my first one-on-one meeting, I said to this one particular person on my staff, I said, what do you think we can do to improve the department? I'm going to now say word for word exactly what he said to me, but I'm going to embellish with what my evil twin over here, what my evil twin saw with the nonverbals. I said, what do you think we can do to improve the department? And he said, well, you can be a better supervisor. Now, I don't know if all this ugly body was going on. I call that the ugly body with all the... I don't know if all that was really going on. My evil twin heard that, but he did say word for word, you could be a better supervisor. Warning, red alert, insubordinate, write him up. This was the evil twin over here saying, what in the world? Write him up. That is insubordinate. And so I was like at a loss. And then I remembered those years ago, my mentor's advice. When you get criticism or negative feedback, ask for more. On that day, when he says you can be a better supervisor, I said, how do you mean? I could have said, can you elaborate? I could have said, tell me more. I could have said, can you give me some examples? I could have asked any number of things which are ways for asking for more. But I said, how do you mean? His reply, well, some of us were talking. Now, do you notice nothing good ever follows that statement? Some of us were talking. And we've decided that we don't know what you think about how we're doing on a day-to-day basis. Surely if something's gone wrong, you will come out and let us know. But on a day-to-day basis, we don't really know what you think about how things are going, how we're doing. And I'm like, what do you suggest? Well, maybe at our one-on-one meetings, you can tell us one thing we're doing well and maybe one thing that we could work on. Okay. I got nothing. I had no idea. I tried it and it was brilliant. And I thought, wow, how could that story have ended differently? So your last opportunity with your best friend for now, I'm going to give you a chance to chat about when did you receive some negative feedback or criticism that you didn't want to hear? And how did you respond? And better yet, how might you have responded differently? by asking for more. So I'll give you a few moments to chat about that. Your last chance during our time together to talk with your best friend for now. So I want to spend our last bit of time talking about what to do when someone asks your opinion and you have nothing nice to say. And then we'll talk about our 3 Ps for staying positive. By the way, that is a picture of myself and my daughter when she was 2. She's now 26. So I don't know. I don't know what's more scary, the fact that that was her 24 years ago or me 24 years ago. But she points out that the significance of this particular photo, which I have a tendency to post sometimes on her birthdays on Facebook, but she points out that this was probably the last time that she would ever get caught wearing a matching dress with her mother. But I will come back to her, the significance of why she's on this particular slide when I talk about the 3 options for responding. And the reason I say this is because, I've been speaking since she was 2, and so she has been sufficiently brainwashed and uses my material against me. So I'll come back to that in a moment. But I will say that, isn't it interesting that there are always people who try to drag you into the fray? The ones who try to say things like, well, what do you think of the new vice president? What do you think of the new supervisor? What do you think of that new coworker? And anything you say can and will be used against you. So the goal, I got excited over there. The goal is to not get dragged into the fray. And so I love these 3 options. The first time they say, well, what do you think of whoever? And you can say, you know what, I've been too busy to even think about him. That's a non-response. Or better yet, anyone who asks you, what do you think about, has an opinion. And so when you say, you know what do you think about it? And then they're off and running. And you're off the hook. Or better yet, how about double up? I haven't had time to think about it. What do you think about it? Use 1 and 2, boom, boom. And my favorite, the third one, of course, is focus on the positive. You might think of 9 things about that person that you don't like, but there's surely that one thing. Surely you can say, you know what, I have to give it to them. They're really good with the customers. You don't have to give it to them. They're really good with inspiring the staff. There's always going to be one thing, something you can focus on. But what I think is interesting is sometimes it's not the person trying to stir the pot. Sometimes it's that colleague, that friend, that person who says, what do you think about my new outfit? What do you think about my new boyfriend? What do you think about my project? What do you think about that presentation I did to the board? What do you think about ... And this is one of those examples where we have to invoke the say what you mean what you say, but there's no need to crush them. No need to be saying it mean. And we can give feedback without being harsh. And I find focusing on the positive is a great way to give feedback when you might have some negative feedback. Someone asks you about something. Someone says, for example, what do you think about my presentation? I'll pick that since that's something I'm familiar with. And you're thinking to myself, well, things I can't repeat. It was so boring. Oh, as a friend of mine likes to say, I could stick a fork in my eye. I know. Ooh. But I have a friend who says that very graphically, which is her way of saying, oh, it was just so awful. There's no need to say that to someone. To say, well, it was just boring. But you could say, I would have suggested adding a few more stories. Or I would have suggested adding a few more examples of how our clients have succeeded. Or I would suggest, so there's always a way to say, here's what I suggest, rather than saying it was awful. And so we can say what we mean what we say, but don't have to say it mean. By the way, the reason I put my daughter up here on the screen is when she was about 15. And now, first of all, let me see, how many of you have teenagers or, like me, live to tell about it? Okay, that's not everybody. Okay, how many of you at least would recognize a teenager if you saw one around the corner? Okay. Hey, and here's a question. How many of you work with people who act like teenagers? Because, the teenagers, by that I mean, whatever. As I used to say to my daughter, I noticed that you said whatever, and I'm wondering what you mean. That was phrase number 6, in case any of you were wondering, from the top 10. But my daughter will use my material against me. And I remember one time when she was about 15, we were having a little push-pull, and I ask her a simple question. Honey, what do you think of my new outfit? And without missing a beat, she looked at me without even pausing, and she says, Mom, the important thing is, what do you think of your new outfit? I hate that when she uses my stuff against me. But certainly these are some options that we can use to not get dragged down into the fray and into the negativity. And so we spent a lot of time talking about how do we say things in a positive way and speak so that people love hearing us and listening to us, but then how do we also listen so that people love speaking to us? Again, it works both ways. But I know that some of you are thinking about situations where you work or maybe where you live, and you're thinking, it's not going to ever change. They're never going to get it. I know some of you, again, can name names. But I'm reminded of the Maya Angelou quote when she says, you know what, if you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. Whatever you do, don't complain. Because sometimes we complain and whine about things that aren't going to ever get changed. And we have to decide, do we want to be that person? You know, is there a way that we can change our attitude, our perspective, in order to not let it affect us so personally? And that's why I want to spend our remaining time together talking about the 3 Ps for staying positive. So I go to my final slide, and I want to spend our last bit of time on this slide with the 3 Ps for staying positive. And I do have to give a shout out to Dr. Martin Seligman, who is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. And he's considered to be the guru, almost the granddaddy, of the positive psychology movement. He's spent his entire life studying why are some people positive no matter what? And why do other people go to the dark side? Have you ever thought about that? You probably know people who bad things have happened to them, but they still manage to be positive. There's other people, let's say, for example, some people I know, I might say something like, you know, look, there's surely a light at the end of the tunnel. And they're the person who's going to say, Sarita, I see the light. Looks like an oncoming train to me. In other words, those people who are never going to be fixed, they're never going to be more positive no matter what you say or do. But I think the million-dollar question is, how can you keep from going to the dark side? What is the make or break that will determine whether you stay positive or whether you become negative? And I think I borrow from Dr. Martin Seligman's work, and I've kind of embraced his work, and I've summed it up with the 3 Ps. And the first P is, are you taking things personally? You know, people will say, I know my company just changed the policies to make my life miserable. You probably can name names of people who sound like that. I hate to tell you, they weren't thinking about you. You know, I read way too many of those women's magazines. And I think I was reading in the O magazine, and it was an interesting article they had recently, and it said, you would be depressed if you knew how seldom it was about you. Isn't that interesting? Something to ponder, because most of the time it's not about us, but we try to make it about us. The second make or break is is permanent. As in, complete this phrase, another one of my mom's favorites, this too shall pass. And if you're able to see that whatever thing is I'm in this situation right now, I hate it, but I'm going to look back on that and say, I got through it. Sometimes we might go as far as saying, I'm going to look back on this and laugh. We're going to look back on this and it won't even matter 5 years from now. And then lastly, in the big picture, does it matter in the big picture? You know, it's interesting that sometimes you probably know people who say things like, way back in 2005, things changed. It's been awful ever since. It'll never get better. It'll never be the same. It'll never... And don't you just want to smack them and go, snap out of it? Move on. But they've somehow allowed that one situation to to negatively color their entire situation. So let's review the 3 Ps. Just make sure you're with me. First P, am I taking it what? Personally. Is it permanent? Does it matter in the big picture? Personal, permanent picture. You know what the number one question is that people ask me? They say, Sarita, I'm fairly positive, but I work with whiners. How do I not allow that to contaminate me? I say personal, permanent picture. Someone comes in, oh, it's awful, I've had a bad day, let me tell you. We don't have to take that on. We're moving on, and we don't let it ruin our entire day, week, year, life. A couple quick examples as I close of people who've invoked the 3 Ps, which I think is wonderful. There was a woman who said to me, Sarita, my boss is a jerk. I'm paraphrasing, that wasn't the word she used. She said, my boss is a jerk, but I console myself by saying it could be worse. I could be married to him. But guess what? She was not the one who got the point. I gave the point to the woman sitting right next to her who said, I am married to someone just like that, but I console myself by saying, it could be worse. I could be him. She got the point. And then I'm reminded of the day that I showed up at one of those mandatory seminars where they'd been sent, and a man standing at the door looked me up and down when I walked in, and he looks and he says, you remind me of my ex-wife. And I said, oh, it's going to be a long day for you then, isn't it? and so I want to close with a thought. You know, they say there are people who brighten the room when they enter the room. And then there are those who brighten the room when they leave. Which one will you be? Thank you so much.
Sarita, we're so pleased that you were here. Here's some information about people who shaped Oklahoma in a positive way.
Thank you.
And since you said you like tchotchkes, I was like, you can add this to your keychain.
Oh, I love it. I'm a tchotchke fan.
This has a flash drive.
Oh, nice. Oh,
okay.
I love nice tchotchke. Thank you,
So,
Shannon. Thank you all so much.
For students that are here, if you would like a copy of this, you're welcome to pick one up from Cherry in the back. And also, I gave away the copy. Sarita's book is available if you would like a signed copy. It's $10 payable directly to her cash, and that will be on sale back here. If you are needing a CPE certificate, that will be on this side of the room. And at the suggestion of the Oklahoma Accountancy Board, we ask you to sign them before you leave. We love you. We trust you. We just want to honor what they suggested. I couldn't find this anywhere in the regs, but we'll continue to do that. And if you could help us and don't take it personally, we appreciate it. We'll see you in January. Thank you for coming today. I did. I talked to you.